Welcome to a three-part series that I'm calling Technology in the Home, a conversation with me, Tim Cavey. You can reach me at tcavey@vancouverchristian.org if you have any questions or comments from this presentation. This will be a three-part series. The first part will deal with technology in education. We'll talk about the whys, the opportunities, and the risks. In part 2, we'll look at The TechWise Family, a book by Andy Crouch that outlines 10 commitments every family can make with technology. And in part 3, we'll talk about some Cavey family practices. Not that my family is perfect, far from it, but I do know that sometimes it's helpful to look over some shoulders and see what other families are doing with technology. When we talk about technology, we want to make sure we are engaging in thoughtful conversations. Technology use is filled with complexities and moving parts. I believe, as I'm sure you do, that wise management of technology is less about settling on black and white absolutes and more about maintaining thoughtful conversations. As I said, I'm speaking not as an expert who has it all figured out, but as an educator and a parent interested in sharing ideas and learning from others like you. By engaging in these conversations, we all become more reflective and intentional in our parenting practices. So where am I coming from? Well, I am the oldest of 4 boys. I'm a child of the 70s, as possibly you are as well. That means I was born and grew up pre-internet and pre-Nintendo. I was raised in a pretty conservative home. No cable TV, no secular radio, no movie theaters, no video game consoles. Look at all of those no's. I have enjoyed computing from childhood through to the present, including coding, creating, writing, podcasting, and other creative activities. Who am I today? Well, I'm married with 2 stepsons, aged 14 and 16 years, grades 9 and 11. In 2015, I was able to help lead a school-wide transition into Google Classroom. That was at Carver Christian High School. I've taught digital citizenship, information technology in grades 7 through 9. And today, I'm the vice principal of Vancouver Christian Middle School. That's probably why you're watching this video right now. So in this first part, I want to talk about technology in education. Technology can support learning by doing the following 5 things. It can improve access to resources, strengthen comprehension, allow students to represent their learning in creative ways, empower greater collaboration, and heighten engagement. And I will break down each of those 5 a little bit further, but for now, I'll simply say that if someone asks me, why do we even have technology in education at all? That's a fair question. That's a good question. And this is a large part of my answer, these 5 pillars. So as I continue, keep that in mind. We're sort of answering the question, why technology at all? First of all, technology can support learning by improving access to resources. When I think of platforms like Google Classroom, Seesaw, research databases, Wikipedia, YouTube, Google Maps, and there are many other examples that we could mention, technology does open up opportunities and access to your child, to my children, that otherwise wouldn't be available to them. In the classroom of the 1980s, things were much different. Limited largely, as you will recall, many of you will recall, limited to textbooks and maps and National Geographic magazines and overhead projectors. But many of the resources that our children can learn from are much more advanced. For example, they can see videos at a moment's notice of just about any animal they may be studying. And that was something that we could not even imagine a few decades ago. Number 2, strengthening comprehension. So I think here of programs like Khan Academy or IXL, Dictionary.com, YouTube, other audio video supports. There are many other programs that are used through the primary, intermediate, middle school, and high school levels. A nice thing about many of these programs, not all of them, but many of them, help students learn at their own pace. So I look at that first one, Khan Academy, or the second one, IXL, which focuses on English and math. These programs allow students to work through at their own pace, and that is a really terrific asset. That means that students can take the learning as they need it on a pace that works for them. Number 3, allowing students to represent their learning in creative ways. So again, we have programs like Google Docs, Slides, Sheets, Mind Maps, posters in Canva, recording and editing photos and videos in iMovie, and many other programs that allow students to be more creative. Number 4, they allow, or technology can support learning by empowering greater collaboration. So I don't know if you've seen any of these programs facilitate this in real time, but it is pretty cool. Google Docs, Slides, Drawings, and other similar programs allow students to join in the same document, even if they're not in the same room, on 2 different devices and work together on projects. And many times in the past, I've worked with students, for example, on perhaps they're preparing a slideshow or a research presentation, and they can work with a partner and collaborate in real time on those representations of learning. And finally, fifth and finally, technology can support learning by heightening engagement. So I think of programs, exciting programs like Kahoot, Vocabulary, Jam, Quizzes, Socrative, or Socrative. These programs facilitate group learning activities in real time. And they provide formative assessment information for teachers. So as a teacher, I can see when my class is struggling with a concept in percent. Even if they're having fun doing it, I can observe and record, if I want, the engagement or the proficiency of my students, and that can inform my next instructional steps. Students can also, of course, engage with animations, videos, infographics, and other kinds of learning resources that, again, raise that engagement around the learning. This is where I will end, and there's a lot to be said here, so pardon me while I go through this carefully, and in no way is this an exhaustive list. But I want to look at the strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats posed by technology in education. Many of these will be on your mind, and many of them, most of them, if not all of them, are on our minds at all times as well. I want you to know that. But we want to acknowledge that there are some risks, of course, and there are also opportunities, and that all of these should help to inform our decisions and our policies around technology, and I'll speak to some of that as well. I'm going to start on the negative side, over on the right-hand side. So join me in the top right-hand corner with weaknesses. Let's talk about the weaknesses of technology. Whoops. So technology can give us access to distractions, both students and adults. We need to be wary of that. That's sort of an obvious one, but it's increasingly an issue, and we know from different studies and reports that the rise of distraction is hurting productivity in the workplace in some contexts. So we want to be careful and thoughtful about that. And I'll probably mention our protocols and procedures, what we have set up here at Vancouver Christian School many times as I go forward, but we do have a monitoring service, for example, called Spuddy, that can monitor the activity and the web browsing activity and traffic of our students while they use their Chromebooks. So that is one response that we have to the distractions. We also have an aggressive filter that blocks almost all gaming websites. That's another response that we have to distraction. But I simply want you to know that we are being thoughtful about the ways that our students can be distracted by technology, just as we as adults can be distracted by technology as well. Another weakness of technology in education is it contributes to an increase in overall screen time. And the screen time conversation is a really important one. My own bias, I suppose, or perspective would be that, yes, we want to monitor screen time in terms of eye strain or headaches or sort of negative physical effects, let's say, of too much screen time. But even more or equally important as the quantity of screen exposure is the quality of screen exposure. And so to me, there's a difference when I think about the home environment. I'll talk about this later. To me, there's a difference if my son is engaged with his computer building something creative drawing something, creating content of some kind, writing a story. That's a little bit different than playing Fortnite for the same amount of time. So in the screen time conversation, we do want to think about there's quantity, but there's also quality. We want to keep our eyes on that. Another weakness, the third weakness here, is isolation behaviors. We know that screen time can lead to the cliche head in screen that sort of tunes out neighbors and other social interaction. We want to be wary of that. We also know that technology gives opportunities for cyberbullying. And this has been around since the dawn of the internet. Also something that we want to do some careful teaching around and, of course, monitor to some extent. I say to some extent because as a school we cannot monitor everything, neither do we want to monitor everything that your children are doing at home on your family devices. And there is some opportunity for cyberbullying in those contexts as well. But as far as what falls under the school's jurisdiction, when students are within the building, we want to do what we can to limit cyberbullying activities, and we do recognize that that can occur. And again, in terms of cyberbullying, that can happen through email. I can send Mr. Tinsley a one-liner email that is insulting and mean. That's a form of cyberbullying. So cyberbullying can come in many different forms and shapes, and Mr. Tinsley, I would never do that. Threats, when we think about technology. What are the threats? Well, we know that, and this is top of mind for every parent, so just naming it, our children can be exposed to illicit content. Now, in terms of the school jurisdiction and school devices on the school campus and through the school server, we've got, as I said earlier, an aggressive filter that does limit exposure to illicit content, gambling websites, pornography websites, gaming sites that may be inappropriate, or just most gaming sites in general. So most of that is blocked. However, let's be realistic and say that a Google search could take place where an inappropriate image comes up, or exposure can come in different forms. Maybe a video on YouTube that was not prescribed by the teacher. Different forms of content can come in front of the eyes of our children. I don't think, we'll talk more about our overall posture, I don't think it should always be our objective to bubble wrap our children, because the reality of our technology-saturated world is that they will come across objectionable content at some point in their lives. And I'm not talking about the worst of the worst. I'm just talking about, it might be milder stuff. It might be something that our children see on Netflix with the family, right? And so I think always our posture has to be when they do come across this kinds of content, bad language, let's say, for example, what is their response? How do they engage? How do they process that? Continuing with threats, we also know that screen addiction is an issue as well, a potential threat. And we know that exploitation of privacy can occur as well by bad actors who gain too much access, too much information to the things that we share or create online. So those are a list of weaknesses and threats. They don't make us happy. They make us anxious as parents. But I think through thoughtful engagement and intentional planning, we can manage those risks, those weaknesses, and those threats, and proactively move against them. Strengths and opportunities. So a lot of these I've already mentioned, but under the strengths, again, access to resources, high engagement, enables collaboration, representations of learning. Even with all of those strengths, we don't want any child's education experience to be all technology. There has to be spaces for analog activities as well. And by analog, I mean non-digital, non-screen activities. But there are certainly some amazing strengths. And then in terms of opportunities, improved access to information in the future. We don't know how education will evolve in the next decade, but we do see things like AI, artificial intelligence, giving us greater opportunities, for example, in terms of speech to text, in terms of search algorithms, in terms of other things that are coming alongside to help our students and to sort of understand where they are at. Learning and creating tools only continue to improve. I think I mentioned AI. Yes, I mentioned AI. Right in that same conversation is AR, augmented reality, and VR, virtual reality. These tools are allowing some students, for example, I haven't really played with these yet, but they allow students to go on virtual field trips. So in theory, our students in the next 5 to 10 years may be able to visit the pyramids in sort of a virtual walk around, or other great sites around the globe, which is pretty cool, pretty exciting for them to interact with endangered animals in the Amazon jungle, for example. So these things we see are coming. And then, of course, increased collaboration, even better collaboration than what we have today. So thank you for bearing with me. That was a lot of talking. I've outlined what I think are the main strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats of technology in education. You may have more that you would like to add. Please let me know again at the email address that I mentioned, tkv@vancouverchristian.org. If you think I'm forgetting an important strength, opportunity, weakness, or threat, let me know. But this is a little bit of or I should say a lot of the picture that we keep in mind as we approach technology thoughtfully, intentionally, as we set policy and move forward with technology and learning at Vancouver Christian School. From here, please join me for part 2 of this presentation as I go into The Tech-Wise Family, a book by Andy Crouch, and we talk about 10 commitments that he encourages every family to make. Spoiler alert, my family doesn't follow all 10, but you are welcome to come along and see what he recommends for tech-wise families. Thank you for watching.